Welcome to Kairos Research Center podcast. Christian faith seeking understanding, intellectual witness, and spiritual renewal.
There are other explanations or theories why the tomb is empty. Why are these alternatives not credible?
Here you have raised a question about the alternative explanations to the empty tomb. Yeah, it's true, we Christians very naturally we accept the New Testament evidence of the empty tomb at face value. But it's also true we cannot ignore the fact that there are several popular alternative explanations offered by skeptics to say that there isn't this empty tomb. So I give you this chart, this what I call inadequate alternative explanation. You look at the chart. You have Jesus rose, that's Christianity. Then Jesus did not rise. Alternatively, you have hallucination, myth, conspiration, and then Jesus didn't die. Swoon theory. Now, in one sense, these alternative explanations, they're not new lah. You go to the internet, you can find them all over the place. Apologists like to use this strategy to say this, to debunk all these alternative explanations. So I don't want to spend too much time on it since they are easily available. I'll just go over them quite quickly. Let me start the other way. It's a Swoon theory. These are the theories that suggest there's no death and no empty tomb. So Jesus didn't die, actually. What do you mean by that? Well, on the cross, he swooned. Under stress and loss of blood, he swooned. He fainted, you may say. And then they carried him to the tomb. And after a while, in the coolness of the tomb, Jesus revived, And he survived. He not only survived the crucifixion, and then he somehow contacted the disciples and say, I'm alive. And the disciples say, Jesus has resurrected. So Jesus didn't die. It was an apparent death. But look a little bit more closely, you'll find that this theory doesn't hold. First of all, the suggestion is Jesus survived crucifixion. Hey, come on. You don't survive crucifixion. These Romans are professional killers, okay? Their duty is to make sure you die. And in fact, the reason why the soldiers was going to break the legs of those who have been crucified, because if the legs are broken, they're going to support themselves and breathe carefully, breathe properly, and they will die sooner. And when they arrived at Jesus, they didn't break his leg because they saw that he was already dead, and they pierced his heart. Blood and water flows out, which according to some medical reports is an indication of real death, And so, can you imagine, by the way, let me just go along with this guy who said Jesus didn't die. Well, Jesus was wrapped up in the tomb, in the coolness he awake, and then somehow after having been beaten up, having been tortured, having been crucified, he managed to roll away the stone, and then somehow he managed to bypass the guards, and then he managed to find somewhere in Jerusalem, or actually in Bethany for all you know. The disciples said, behold, I was dead, but now I'm alive forevermore, This doesn't hold in true life. Like, what happens when people who seem to recover from apparent death, you go to the emergency ward, oh, the eyes open, rush again to give emergency medical support. They don't come out triumphant, It's hard to imagine a half-dead Jesus convincing the disciples that he was dead, but now is alive. So I think easy target for apologists, so you may say. The Swoon theory just doesn't hold water. There's the other thing called conspiracy or theft theory. The disciples stole the body. Somebody has to get rid of the body, right? So in Matthew 28 verses 11 to 15, the guards came to the city and told the chief priests all that has happened when they saw the angels roll away and so on, the stone and so on. And then the elders counseled together and gave them a large sum of money, saying, you are to say, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. Here is an interesting counter reading. First of all, the very necessity for the rulers to bribe the soldiers to say they stole the body while we were asleep suggests that the tomb was empty. The very propaganda of the enemy suggests an empty tomb. But it also doesn't hold water, but because if the disciples stole the body, given how small Jerusalem was, I can imagine such parties would have been sent out and the disciples would have been easily found and arrested and the body recovered. I think the very absence of that official refutation in terms of arresting the disciples and reproducing the body says a lot. And also to suggest that the soldiers were suffering dereliction of duty seems very inconsistent with what was expected of guards to be diligent in those days. Then finally, to suggest that the body was stolen would suggest that the disciples stole the body and continue a lie of preaching the resurrection of Jesus. But the very fact was that these disciples were martyred. They were imprisoned, they were martyred in the process of proclaiming that Jesus rose from the dead. If indeed they stole the body and they fabricated a lie, it is unlikely that they will hang around to be martyred for their preaching. Simple psychology. Nobody will die for a lie that one knowingly has fabricated. So the idea of the stolen body does not make sense. There is just simply no motive. Why would they want to do that when they have to pay a price? I can believe I will lie if I can get something from it. It is impossible that the disciples would have lied and be willing to pay for their lives, preaching of all things in the very site of Jerusalem where Jesus was supposed to have been buried. Now, the other theory was a straightforward hallucination theory, that the disciples, what they saw were hallucinations of the risen Christ, which they mistook and took to be the resurrected Jesus Christ. Now, hallucination only visits the prepared minds, meaning, I can imagine a mother who lost her son, in her longings for the son who was lost at sea, wishing the son were with her, sitting at the veranda one day looking at the sea, and then it was getting dark, and then suddenly she dropped out of reality and thought she saw her son coming back to her. But that is only for a brief moment. The story of the resurrection of Christ is totally different. Psychologically, there was no preparation for the hallucination because the disciples were not expecting a resurrection. The hallucination only visits the prepared mind in a vulnerable emotional condition when it was getting dark. Interestingly, there is all this appearance of Jesus were in broad daylight one, not dark, dreamy world. And then hallucination very often will happen to individuals. But in the gospel records, there were many witnesses. Jesus appeared to the women, yes, but to the disciples and 500 at the same time, and that they were repeated, so to say. So, and finally, so in a sense, I would say hallucination is a psychological improbability. And at the end of the bottom line is, if there was hallucination, that means it wasn't real. That means if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, there will still be the body in the tomb. And then, if it were hallucination, all that the critics needed to do was to go to Jerusalem and just point out to the empty tomb, you may want to say. So, let me just say, all these theories, they ignored that there was no predisposition of the disciples. Jesus did not appear to believers. Yes, he did. Or rather, he appeared to those who were destined to be believers. But actually, Jesus appeared to unbelievers. There was no expectation. They were not believing the resurrection. It was totally odd and unexpected for the first Christian who at best believed in the general revelation of the end times, never expecting Jesus to be resurrected in their times. So I would say hallucination is a very unlikely explanation for the empty tomb. So I would say that even hallucination has to account for the fact that it was seen by men and women, individuals and groups, attested by friends and foes. And so Jesus appeared indoor and outdoors, not seen once or twice, but Jesus appeared many times over a period of 40 days. So I think I would say that while I admire the ingenuity of all these alternative explanation, whether it be the hallucination, whether it be the Swoon theory, whether it be the conspiracy theory, they do not hold water when we examine them a bit carefully. So the empty tomb, I would say, seems to be founded on strong historical facts. And I would say that the evidence for the empty tomb is pretty robust. And I want to stress that in proclaiming the empty tomb and the historical foundation, it doesn't need sophisticated defense. What is needed is just a plain reading of the various accounts with common sense applied, as in court cases. So I think that is itself a strength of the resurrection record. You don't need to be an expert to read it and come to your own conclusion. Just read the various records. So there was indeed the empty tomb.